As I'm sure you've already heard by now, Chris Rock was hosting the Oscars last weekend when he made a joke about Will Smith's wife that Will didn't find very funny after a few seconds of seemingly finding it funny.
Oh, wow.
But as all of this started to unfold and Will started defending his actions as being God's calling on his life, I started to realize how all of this mess was centered around Will's faulty definition of love, which also led Will to believe that it was God's will for him to add Chris Rock to his list of greatest hits. So how did Will's faulty definition of love get him from here to here? Let's start with the story all about how his life got flipped, turned upside down. A few months ago, Will talked about how his open marriage was even more loving than a traditional marriage since he selfishly allows for his wife to sleep with other men. We have given each other trust and freedom with the belief that everybody has to find their own way, and marriage for us can't be a prison. And I don't suggest our road for anybody, but the experiences that the freedoms that we've given one another and the unconditional support, to me, is the highest definition of love. What led him to that conclusion is that him and his wife were having problems and they couldn't stop fighting, but eventually they found that the solution to their problems was simply to realize that they weren't responsible for each other's emotions. Will has stated how this realization has took the pressure off of their marriage and allowed for them to be happier.
And it feels so good.
It was in this way that they realized that they just needed to make themselves happy and not blame the other person for how they felt inside. This is why they both recently have been saying things like this.
You go figure out how to make yourself happy, and I'll figure out how to make myself happy.
Well, you can't find happiness outside of yourself.
It is not your responsibility to make your wife happy. It's my responsibility to make me happy, and it's her responsibility to make her happy.
So according to Jada and Will, you should never take responsibility for your spouse's emotions, and it's their responsibility to take care of their own emotions. To Will, he says that this is the highest definition of love. But now, just a few months later, Will appears to have changed his mind completely on this, and this was evidenced by his actions and his speech at the Oscars, which, by the way, reminded everyone that the Oscars were actually still a thing. And as I'm sure you've heard by now, Will Smith physically attacked Chris Rock at the awards on Sunday for making a joke about his wife. After the altercation, after no security came, it got even more awkward when Will stayed there to receive his first Oscar award for the movie King Richard. King Richard was based on Venus and Serena Williams' father, who, as Will says, was a fierce defender of his family.
Richard Williams was a fierce defender of his family.
During his acceptance speech, Will seems to use this image of King Richard as a parallel to him defending his family by pimp slapping Chris Rock in the mouth. He then goes on to talk about how defending others, like his wife, is his calling from God.
I am overwhelmed by what God is calling on me to do and be in this world. I'm being called on in my life to love people and to protect people. I want to be a vessel for love.
Now, I want you to notice here what Will means when he talks about defending and loving others in that speech. When it comes to defending his wife, he doesn't mean physically, because Chris Rock was nowhere near them and he wasn't threatening his wife or anything like that. So when Will talks about how he has this calling on his life to love and to defend others, what he really means is that it's his calling to protect them emotionally. But this is a radically different understanding of love than the one that Will defended just a few months ago. Just a few months ago, Will talked about how the highest definition of love consisted of not taking responsibility for your spouse's emotions and realizing that their emotions are their responsibility to deal with on their own. But now, just a few months later, we heard him defending the exact opposite view during the Oscars. In both his actions and his acceptance speech, by defending her, he defended her emotions and essentially, quite literally, made her emotions his responsibility. He essentially did what he said that we should never do, and that's taking her emotions and her happiness into his hands and making it his job instead of her job.
It is not your responsibility to make your wife happy. It's her responsibility to make her happy.
So if Will was right a few months ago, and the highest definition of love is not taking responsibility for your spouse's emotions, then on the face of it, Will was essentially being unloving towards his wife at the Oscars. But to be completely fair to Will, the confusion around his view of love isn't entirely his fault. Him and Jada, like most of us millennials today, have gotten the idea from culture that love is primarily a positive emotion. This is why on the one hand, hand, Will can say that love is not taking responsibility for someone's emotions. And on the other hand, he can say that it is taking responsibility for someone's emotions. And it's also the reason why he can tie all of this to God's purpose in his life. The reason why is because he's tying love to an emotion. And like all of us, when we do that, we end up with all kinds of bizarre conclusions. When love is primarily understood as a positive emotion, then for you to love yourself means that you'll put yourself first and do what makes you happy. This is why Will and Jada said that they cheated on each other at the expense of the other person's happiness.
What do you feel like you were looking for?
I just wanted to feel good. You can't find happiness outside of yourself.
If that's the right definition of love, then loving yourself means putting your happiness above the happiness of other people. So when you put yourself first and you do what makes you happy, others might get hurt in the process, but that might be necessary if you're gonna love yourself first. We've seen this play out in a million reality shows. How could you break my heart? I'm sorry, but I have to love myself first before I can love anyone else. But you ruined my life. I'm just doing me. You can't judge me for that. Excuse me, but where's my Oscar for that performance? Thank you. Thank you all so much. Thank you all so much. And so with this definition, this also means that when it comes to loving others, that means that you put them first and do what makes them happy. And when you do what makes them happy, then again, others might get hurt in the process. Oh, wow. But again, like we just said, if this is the correct definition of love, then others getting hurt might be necessary if you're going to love someone by prioritizing their happiness. This view of love being tied to positive emotions is why we see all kinds of things in the world, like some people in social justice movements truly believing that they're being loving by defending the feelings of marginalized people, and seemingly, like Will, think that physically assaulting people due to hurt feelings is perfectly acceptable and the loving thing to do. Since people seem to think that feelings are the most critical thing, then to be a defender of feelings means defending those feelings at any cost, including physical violence. Now, I'm not hating on Will because in most of my adult life, I thought about love being this way as well, and I couldn't even conceive of it being a different way. But one of the things that changed my views on this entirely is when I thought about what Jesus meant when he said for you to
love your enemies.
At first, I couldn't understand what he meant by that, because if love were having nice and positive feelings towards people, then how could Jesus command you to have nice feelings towards people that you don't like and people that wronged you? That didn't seem to make any sense to me. But as I looked at what the word meant in its context and what it meant in the original Greek, I noticed that the word that Jesus used there was a word that refers to self-sacrificial actions instead of emotions or feelings. I might not be able to have positive emotions or feelings towards my enemies, but I can do things for them in a way that's self-sacrificial, no matter how I feel inside. But when I thought even deeper about this, I thought, how could anyone treat their enemies this way? This just didn't seem possible. And then I started to wonder if Jesus himself even treated people this way. That's when I started to think about how he chose to die for our sins and not for his own personal gain or for his own sake. Instead, he did it for us and only our sake. This is a perfect demonstration of the type of love that God has for us, even while we're still his enemies. And it's this type of love that Jesus showed, not this type of love.
I want to be a vessel for love. Love will make you do crazy things.
I believe is a much better example of what it means to truly love someone. Just something to think about. But back to Will. About his open marriage being more loving instead of less, in this video, I talk about why, even though I understand his point, I disagree with his conclusion. Click here to see what I mean. But the next time that you find yourself confusing love with positive emotions, what are you gonna say? What do you mean?